bread, tofu, eggs, and cream. Yes, for pudding day today on Let's Cook. Hi, welcome to Let's Cook. It is pudding day today on Let's Cook. And let me just go over the menu because I have a great menu. We're making a chocolate bread pudding. Now, the chocolate bread pudding that we're making has a butterscotch macadamia crunch topping out of this world. Then we're also going to make some scones with a spiced berry sauce, not too sweet, nice and hot. And then we're going to do basically a gluten-free tofu bread pudding. So that's what we're making today. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to get started on my chocolate butterscotch crunch bread pudding. Now, to make this, the first thing that I'm going to do is I think I'll just cut up the bread. Now, the bread that I'm using, this is a white bread, and it's what you might call a peasant loaf. You see all the tunneling in the bread. Whenever you see air holes in bread like this, this is known as tunneling. And all we have to do is cut this up, and you can leave the crust on this. You don't need to remove this at all. You just leave it on. Day-old bread is better. If it's a couple of days old, that'll work too. And the way we're going to cut it is we're just going to cut it so that it can really absorb the custard that we're going to make evenly. So we just cut it down this way. You might want to use a serrated knife, but that's a misnomer as far as cutting bread. I'm not using a serrated knife. And if your knife is nice and sharp, you really won't have trouble cutting bread. Now, let's say your knife is a little dull and it's kind of trying to go through like that, not going through. Usually the heel part, the back part of your knife is a little sharper. So if you start that way and you pull it across this way, if you start to get the heel through there, it'll work a little easier in going through the bread if your knife isn't too sharp. So we'll just cut the bread up. This is also a great use of leftover bread. So if you have stale bread and you need to use it, but again, the bread that I'm using here, or maybe I'm saying it for the first time, is only made with water, salt, flour, and yeast. There's no fat in this bread at all. Okay, so we're just going to take our bread, put this right into our bowl here. Now, you do need to soak this bread, but to soak it, I'm going to take my sugar right here. So I have some sugar here. I'm using cocoa powder instead of chocolate sauce. So I take that, and I'll just mix this together. This is just going to make it much easier for the cocoa to dissolve, the cocoa powder to dissolve, and it won't float to the top. Then to this now, I'll add my milk. Mix that together. Then I add my heavy cream. Now, if you just wanted to use milk in this and no heavy cream, you could go ahead and do that. The only thing you might have to do is increase the eggs a little bit. And that's what I have to put in next. My eggs. I'm going to put my eggs in here now, 3 eggs. Make sure, now the nice thing is if you use brown eggs, you can see if a shell goes in there right away, you don't have to worry about it. You might want to break the egg into a bowl before you put it in there to make sure you don't break the shell. So this is good to go, except for just a splash here of vanilla. Now, the other thing you're going to do with this is you're just going to take this little splash here, a little heavy on the vanilla. That's okay. Take this, we pour it over our bread, and then we allow the bread to soak it up. So the bread's just going to go ahead and soak that up. Now, to make the butterscotch crunch, have a pan right here. In this pan right now, I'm just going to melt a little butter. So while that butter melts, I now take my macadamia nuts. These are honey roasted macadamia nuts. And what I'll do with these is I'm just going to take these, chop them finely. I don't want them to be too fine because they do contain a lot of fat. Once they're right about there, that's good. I'm going to come over here. My butter's already melted. Then I end up combining my butterscotch pieces right here with a little bit of fresh breadcrumb and my macadamia nuts. Let me just get a bowl right here. We mix this together, and then we just add the butter there. Now, the butter I'm using is a sweet butter. So I'll get this in here with my bread. We just mix this together. The butterscotch and the chocolate, out of this world together. Now, I just take my melted butter here. This goes right here. We put this right in there. Then with your hand, It's cool enough where you can just toss this around. All I'm doing, and you don't have to do this, by the way, with the butter, but I think it just gives it an extra bit of butter flavor. Now, I already have some bread here that I already soaked. I just take this bread that's already soaked and it's nice and wet. And you can see that there's not a lot of moisture coming out of this, but when I press into it, you see how the juice or the custard comes out of the bread, and I know it's really nice and wet. Then I take my butterscotch with my crumbs right on top. You're going to bake this in a 350-degree oven for roughly right around 30 minutes to make sure that the egg is totally cooked through. I already have one done here, so we can actually show you before and after. So this is after, and this is before. Out of this world. We're going to take a little break, and then when we come back, I'm making some scones with a delicious spiceberry sauce. It's pudding day today on Let's Cook. We'll be right back. Hi, welcome back to Let's Cook and Pudding Day today on Let's Cook. I have a very simple recipe for scones, and I'm going to actually start to mix it while I talk about the ingredients because they're so simple. Basically, I'm going to take some flour, along with the flour, some sugar, a pinch of salt, and baking soda. Now, the great thing about this is the fat actually comes from the heavy cream that I'm going to mix in here. So I just put this on a slow speed, and I gradually add my heavy cream. Now, I realize I did not say baking powder. I might have said baking salt, or I meant to say baking soda, but it's actually baking powder. So we just mix this together just till it comes together. Once it comes together, this recipe is done. This is how fast this goes. See how fast this goes? So we're right here. Then we just, with our hand, if you don't want the dough to stick to your hand, just flour your hand a little bit here and see how it doesn't stick to your hand. And we're just going to go ahead, get this off. Then I'll just work this for a little bit on the board just to kind of knead it together. But it really doesn't take too much time. So let me bring my bowl over here, put a little flour on the board here, bring my dough out, just making sure it doesn't stick. And all I do is I just kind of bring it together this way, just so that it's not sticking to the board. That's all I have to do. That's my scone. Now what I do is I take this, and you'll use a rolling pin when you go to work this. Take the rolling pin, just kind of roll it this way. Now I'm going to roll these relatively thick. I'm going to leave these about an inch thick. Because I have a lot of crew here today, I already have some done, and this is the same recipe here, but I'm just going to roll this out too so that we can make everybody a scone, because these scones are out of this world. You know, working with dough is it's kind of like therapy. You just kind of just become one with the dough. It's nice and quiet. It's almost like playing with sand at the beach. Beautiful dough. Now, we're going to go ahead and cut these. Now, when we cut them, I'm going to use a large round cutter here. And what I'll do with the cutter, so it doesn't stick to the dough, is I'll dip it in flour. That way, when I go to cut it and I remove it, the dough doesn't stick to it. It's a good idea to do that. And don't worry, I'm going to show you what to do with these leftover pieces too. So we'll take this one here. I'll get one here. Whoops. Now, if it does pop out like that, just cut it away. That means this dough hasn't rested as long as the other one, so it might be just a little damper, but it's still going to work. And this one right here, I can get one more out of here. Good. Now, take our dough out of the way here. Then we'll take these. I'm using a silk pad here, and I'm going to set these up on a silk pad right here. And then we'll take and we'll brush off that excess flour. Now, this is the top side right here that I cut right here. This is the top side right here. When I go to put it on the baking pan, I'm going to turn it over. This way it'll rise more evenly once it gets its jump. So let me get this on here. Okay, good. These are good to go. Now, with the leftover dough you have, the easiest thing to do is just take this dough, work it together, and then allow it to rest a little bit. Let that gluten in the dough just kind of relax a little bit, and then you can make more scones out of this. You can roll it out, or you can even roll it into a piece like this, and then with a knife, you can take And you can actually cut them down this way, and you can make scones just like this as well. Just as easy. Both ways will work. Now what we're going to do, we'll bring these up over here. Then we're just going to remove that excess flour. Take a little bit of heavy cream now. We take the heavy cream and we just brush it liberally on the scones. Doesn't that look great? Now, you could also use butter here, and you can also brush these with heavy cream when they come out, but with the spiceberry sauce we're making today, you will not need to do that. So we brush it here with our heavy cream. Then we take just regular granulated sugar on top here. Just a little bit on top. Now, because I'm making a spiceberry syrup for these, I need a location for the syrup to go. I have some small ramekins here. All I'm going to do is take these, press them into the middle of the scone, just a little bit right there. That way, when they're in the oven, the outside will rise right up around the small ramekin or bowl here, and I'll end up with a nice location to put my syrup in. So we'll pop these in the oven. This is a 375 to 425 degree oven based on your oven. They'll be in there for anywhere from 12 to almost 20 minutes based on the thickness that you've made them and how big around they are. Next, our berry syrup. Let's go over the ingredients for the berry syrup, because this is a great berry syrup because it has a little spice to it. So I have 4 different berries that I'm using here. I have some strawberries, blackberries, raspberries, blueberries, little lemon juice, some water, sugar, and I'm using cayenne pepper in this. Now, if you follow this recipe exactly, you'll end up with a slightly sweet berry syrup that when you have it with the scone just kind of hits the back of your throat, the gorge, and it's absolutely just a nice heat at the end of the sweet scone. So all we do is we just take all our berries right here, put them in the pot right here, trying to keep the blueberries so that they stay in the pot and not on the counter. Then we add our cayenne, our lemon juice, our water, and our sugar. All we do with this now is we take this and put it on a low heat and let it steep. As it steeps and simmers, the juice of the berries come out, and we end up with a sauce that actually looks just like this. You see this beautiful sauce that we have right here? So this is what we'll end up having. But in order to see it get to this stage, you're going to have to watch it through the end of the show, because that's about how long this syrup will take. Let's take a little break, and then when we come back, I'm making a tofu bread pudding that is gluten-free and delicious. Don't go anywhere. It's Pudding Day on Let's Cook. We'll be right back. Hi, welcome back to Pudding Day today on Let's Cook. Now we're making a tofu bread pudding. I'm using gluten-free bread in this recipe, which means if you're allergic to gluten, either for any reason, you can actually have this. It has no gluten. Gluten is the elasticity in flour, the proteins in flour that give it its elasticity. Some people cannot have gluten. They need to be on a gluten-free diet, so this recipe will actually work for you. Let me just give you a little bit of tofu info here. Tofu is a soy product. It has a lot of different textures, and it's easy to digest. Lactose-free and cholesterol-free, very healthy for you. Loaded, very high in protein. As a matter of fact, when I make this, because I'm using egg whites in this, it actually ends up being a complete protein containing all 8 essential amino acids. This recipe is good for those, again, for that gluten-free diet. So let me go ahead and get started making this now. First thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my wet ingredients and mix them together in a bowl with some of my dry. For this, I'm going to use some coffee and sugar. That's instant coffee with a little bit of sugar. I'm going to mix that together. Then to this now, I'm adding some soy milk. So we're just going to add our soy milk to this. Again, this is basically, aside from the eggs, dairy-free if you don't use this next ingredient, which is sweetened condensed milk. So you can actually eliminate this part if you would like it to be lactose-free. So we just mix this together. That's good to go. Now the bread that I'm using, the gluten-free bread, I have right over here. This bread, unlike the other bread, really absorbs the liquid relatively easy, and you'll find this in the frozen food section of your supermarket. It's very easy to crumble. You can actually, don't even have to cut this. You can just actually break this up with your hand, or you could dice it. But this will absorb the liquid very quickly. So I have my bread right here. Let me just put this on the side over here because, well, I'll just throw this in here. I can use that right in there. Now, the other thing I have right here is I have a little bit of tofu. This is a nice firm tofu. Now, if you're making this, it's a good idea to use a firm tofu just because it's easier to cut. Or if you have one that is silken, okay, or softer, you can take and you can drain it overnight. Just put it in a strainer and let some of the liquid drain out of it. But we just take our tofu. See how nice and easy this dices up? Again, this is a really simple recipe too. Then we take this, cut this across this way. Now what I'm going to do, which is a little different here, is I'm not going to soak the bread. I'm not going to soak the tofu. I'm simply going to take my bread, mix it right with my tofu right here. I have a little bit right here too. Just going to mix that in with the tofu. Then I have some egg whites here. Now the egg whites, I'm going to lightly whip just to lighten this up a little bit. So what I'll do is I'll take a little bit of lemon juice right here, my copper bowl. I'll put a splash of lemon juice in there. It'll also work in stainless steel. With a very clean towel, we clean this out. What the acid does is the acid helps to stabilize the egg whites and also make sure that they take on air relatively quickly. I'll put my egg whites in here. And then I just need you need to make sure that you have a very clean whip when you go to do this, because if your whip isn't immaculately clean, it won't whip up. So we're just going to take our egg whites down and lightly whip them. We just need to get a little bit of air in there. See how they're already starting to take on air? So we just take these, see, and all we're doing is incorporating a little bit of air into these. See? See how nice that is? And where we want them to be slightly soft peak. Here we go. Okay, good. This is now good to go. Now I'll just take this, add this right to my custard mix. I'll just use a spoon to mix this now, just to incorporate those eggs. See, it just lightened it up a little bit. Then I take the bowl, I pour it right over the tofu with the bread. There we are. Doesn't that look good? Just mix this around so that the liquid can be absorbed by the bread. We bake this in a 325-degree oven, a lower heated oven, for about 45 minutes. And you already saw what it looked like if you watched the other segment, but this is what it looks like right over here. Absolutely out of this world. Let me get this one in the oven. And while we go to break, you can take a look at the berry syrup, spicy berry syrup that we're using to go with our scones that still have to come out of the oven. It's pudding day today on Let's Cook. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Hi, welcome back to Pudding Day today on Let's Cook. Now, I have some scones in the oven that we're going to be taking out. And what I did with the scones is I put a little bit of a ramekin or porcelain dish in the middle of them so that it would not rise, and I'd have a place for the berry syrup. Just show you how I'd like to finish this. First thing I'm going to do is come over here, and it's a good idea, and I never showed you this in a segment, but it's a good idea if you want. You can go ahead and spray the porcelain with a little bit of oil, just to prevent it from sticking, but you'll see how easy this comes out. See, we just take this and we remove this. Now we have a nice location here to go ahead and fill it with our berry syrup. Then what we do is we let them cool down a little bit in a perfect world, take and dust them liberally with powdered sugar, then take some of our berry syrup that is cooled down, and this is how you finish them. Doesn't this look great? Don't you just feel like biting into this right now? I do. Okay, so that's how we finish our scone. Today on Pudding Day, we did a delicious chocolate butterscotch crunch with macadamia bread pudding. Then we did the scones that we just finished right here, where we have the scones here with the delicious spice berry syrup out of this world. And then to make it gluten-free, little heart healthy, little heart friendly, we did a delicious tofu gluten-free bread pudding here, flavored with a little bit of coffee. Thank you for watching Let's Cook today, and I hope every day you have is a pudding day. Bye-bye for now.